You're sitting under the awning of a crumbling stable, just outside a small medieval village. It smells faintly of hay-damp wool and roasted onions dinner's long past. The only sound is a soft rustle from a cloth bag next to you. Then a nose pops out, followed by a head. Then a long, noodle-shaped body with eyes like polished buttons. Meet your new hunting assistant, a ferret named Wilkin, or possibly Maud. The villagers don't bother with consistent names for ferrets. They just call out that one and hope for the best. But don't let the size fool you. This little creature is about to show you how to flush out more rabbits in an hour than a team of squires could chase down all day. In the medieval world, where meat was precious and time was short, hunting wasn't just a sport, it was survival ceremony and sometimes social climbing. But ferrets didn't care about any of that. They just wanted to run into holes and make things run out. See, the brilliance of ferrets lies in their design. Long, thin, flexible, they're practically built to be a medieval plumbing solution for burrows. A rabbit's worst nightmare wrapped in fur and mischief. You crouch beside the burrow entrance, and with an exaggerated sense of ceremony, you untie the bag and release the star of the show. Wilkin zips into the hole with the speed of gossip in a nunnery. Silence, then a thump, then panic. The bushes rustle, and two rabbits bolt out of nearby holes in synchronized terror. The dog leaps, the net drops, and just like that, you've got dinner. But here's the twist. You're not just hunting. You're practicing a sport that in some noble courts was considered so refined it was reserved for ladies of high status. In fact, some noble women kept ferrets like you might keep an expensive falcon, complete with special gloves and jeweled collars. And if you're wondering if that's a little extravagant for something that eats rats well, welcome to the Middle Ages. Historical fact of the night. The use of ferrets in hunting goes back to at least the 4th century BCE, but in medieval Europe it was formalized. They weren't just wild creatures, they were trained professionals. Some documents even refer to laws protecting hunting ferrets. No stealing, no harming, and under no circumstances should you try to race one. That last part might not be in the law books, but trust me, they're fast, and you'll lose. Here's a quirky little side note. Ferrets were often transported in baskets, pouches, and even sleeves. Yes, sleeves. Apparently there's at least one 13th century tapestry that shows a noble with a ferret curled around their arm, like a fashion-forward snake. So if you thought oversized hoodie pockets were a modern thing, nope. Ferret chic was a whole vibe, and if you're wondering how medieval folks kept these little creatures from running off into the woods forever, the answer is, they didn't. Not always. There are dozens of records about ferrets disappearing mid-hunt, luring hunters into dense woods, or simply deciding mid-job to nap. One bishop even accused ferrets of being unreliable allies of the flesh, which sounds very dramatic for something that's the size of a baguette. Now here's where the scholars start side-eyeing each other across centuries. Some argue that ferrets were indispensable and widely used across all classes, while others believe they were a luxury item kept more for entertainment and status than actual work. The truth is, probably somewhere in between a small, furry paradox of purpose and prestige, and you in this moment, with muddy boots and a twitchy bundle of fur at your feet, are part of that paradox. One foot in necessity, the other in pageantry. By the way, you might have noticed something ferrets smell. Not in a horrifying way, just in a distinct way. Medieval folks didn't mind. They had other things to worry about, like plagues and taxes and soup theft. But if you were highborn, Your ferret might have been lightly perfumed with lavender or rosemary. Not for the ferret's comfort mind, you just so it wouldn't clash with the tapestries. As the stars rise over the hunting field, your little companion pokes their head back out of the burrow, blinking slightly dusty and clearly pleased with themselves. Mission complete. Dinner secured. Status elevated. Tiny paws, big mission indeed. And now, a few closing chuckles to carry you gently toward dreams. Why don't ferrets tell secrets? Because they always tunnel out of them. What do you call a ferret in armor? A knight errant in extra small chainmail. And how do you know a ferret's been in your library? All the scrolls are missing, and there's fur in your inkwell. Sleep tight, friend. The night is quiet now, but history always whispers. Tunnels and tiny teeth. You're kneeling at the edge of another field, now fingers pressed to the cold earth, listening. Not for hoofbeats or trumpets, but for the faintest scritch-scratch beneath the ground. The hunt today isn't about bravado. It's about patience, stealth, and a creature with tiny needle-like teeth and the determination of a K. Today's task is simple on paper: flush a rabbit from a warren. But this is no ordinary hole in the dirt. This is a sprawling tunnel system more elaborate than your average inn's plumbing. The rabbits have lived here for generations. They know the twists, the side exits, the safe zones. You reach into the pouch at your side. The lining is warm with movement, and soon enough out comes the ferret, sleek, slightly drowsy, and licking its nose like it just woke up from a dream about chasing ghosts. You've tied a tiny bell to its collar. Not for decoration, mind you, but so you can hear its progress underground. It's like medieval sonar, adorable jingling sonar. Historical fun fact bells were often used on ferrets in the Middle Ages for exactly this reason. Hunters couldn't see where the ferret was once it went underground, but they could listen for the jingle. If the sound stopped for too long, well, time to dig. Or pray. Or both. You lower your companion into the burrow entrance. With a flick of the tail and a shiver of excitement, it vanishes into the shadows like a sock slipping behind a cabinet. A few moments of silence pass. Then the bell begins to tinkle, faintly, rhythmically. The sound moves, shifts, pauses, then suddenly erupts into a flurry of activity as a rabbit darts out from an exit hole 20 feet away. Net, snap, done. One more for the cookpot. But you're not done yet. That tunnel's got more corners than a tax collector's ethics. You move to the second entrance. Repeat the ritual. Another run. Another flush. Sometimes the rabbit escapes. Sometimes it doesn't. But always the ferret comes back. Eventually, here's a delightful side detail. Some ferrets were trained to come back with a prize. Not a rabbit, those were too big. But small game. Mice. Shiny things. There's even one record of a ferret returning with a coin in its mouth, which led to the entire village believing it was blessed. Or cursed. Or both. You know how medieval villagers are with subtlety. And here's where the academic scuffling begins. Some scholars argue that the practice of using ferrets was highly regional, especially popular in parts of France, England, and the Low Countries. Others insist it was common across all of Europe. But of course, the problem with medieval records is that people didn't always write down what they considered ordinary. So ferret hunting might have been widespread, or it might have just been a few passionate enthusiasts and their smelly, wiggly companions. Like medieval ferret influencers, but with more mud. You're not alone in the field today. There's a boy with you, maybe 10 years old, watching with wide eyes. His tunic's a little too big, his boots are mismatched, and he's clearly memorizing every movement you make. This is how knowledge passed down back then, not through books, but through repetition, observation, and stories. So tonight, when he goes back to his cottage, he'll tell his siblings how the earth shook and the rabbits flew, and the ferret was faster than lightning. Speaking of stories, there's a persistent legend among hunters that ferrets would sometimes get possessed by the spirits of ancient warriors, which is why they'd occasionally refuse to follow orders. They'd stop mid-hunt, spin in place, or sit and stare at nothing for long minutes. Superstitious hunters saw this as a sign to end the hunt and go home. Realists saw it as a sign the ferret needed a snack. Your ferret, thankfully, is more practical. After its third dive and a successful flush, it scurries back to your ears, twitching belly dusty, clearly expecting a treat. You hand over a bit of dried meat rabbit, ironically, and it accepts with imperial dignity. Now imagine some nobles commissioned little leather gloves for their ferrets to prevent scratches, as if the animal were some sort of dangerously elegant cat burglar. There's even a recorded case of a lady gifting her sister a pair of ferrets in matching embroidered capes. Whether this was a serious gift or an inside joke remains unknown, but the image lives on. As the sun sets behind the treetops and the air thickens with chill, you pack up the nets. The hunt has been productive, not just in terms of meat, but in that strange, intangible currency of medieval life stories. Bragging rights. Proof that even in a world of swords and plagues, there's still room for a few creatures who prefer tunnels to battlefields, and of course, a few closing chuckles to carry with you into the night. What did the rabbit say when it saw the ferret? Oh no, not. The slinky menace again. Why was the ferret banned from the choir? Too much tunneling under the high notes. And how do you train a medieval ferret very carefully and never with your good gloves? Rest well. The tunnels are quiet for now. Medieval ferret trainers, the fire crackles softly beside you tonight, warming your boots and sending tiny embers upward like dancing fireflies with no sense of direction. The smell is part smoke, part fur, and part something you're pretty sure is the remains of old stew. Sitting across from you, hunched over a well-worn leather satchel, is a man who insists he's not a magician, but you're starting to have doubts. This is Dunstan. No title, no land, no visible hygiene plan. But in the world of medieval ferret training, he's what you might call a grandmaster. Not that anyone's keeping score. Dunstan has trained over 50 ferrets, 3 badgers accidentally, and 1 hedgehog that refused to participate in anything except napping in shoes. His current companion is a ferret named Gertrude. She is wrapped loosely in a cloth pouch lined with wool and small bones, training tools, he claims, though it might also be his dinner napkin. You're not here to judge. You're here to learn. Training a medieval ferret isn't all poking and shouting, as you might imagine from a time when people thought sneezing was caused by demons. No, it's an art form. A gentle tug here, a whispered command there, a carefully timed dried beetle treat. Patience is key. Dunstan says you must become the tunnel, a phrase you're not entirely sure he didn't steal from a traveling monk who read too much poetry. You watch as he sets up a practice course, a bundle of logs with hidden passageways, loose straw stuffed into gaps, and a single turnip bait at the far end. Gertrude is released with the gravity of a knight entering battle. She stretches, she yawns, then action. In she goes tail. First, of course, because why not be dramatic? Here's the historical nugget for tonight: records from certain manorial estates show payment to individuals listed simply as ferreters, those employed specifically to manage hunting ferrets. They weren't nobility, but they weren't peasants either. A good ferreterman, or ferreteress, could earn seasonal housing food and even bonuses in the form of extra game, or in one curious case, a pair of boots. Fancy boots with buckles. Some noble households treated these trainers with more respect than the local reeve. Why? Because a reeve couldn't get you fresh rabbit for supper in 20 minutes. A ferreter could. Of course not every trainer was a Dunstan. Some were less refined. A chronicler once described a man who tried to teach his ferret to respond to a trumpet blast. The ferret panicked, leapt into the stew pot, and the nobleman hosting the hunt refused to speak to the trainer ever again. The stew was served anyway. Times were rough. You lean forward, trying to absorb every detail. Dunstan explains how ferrets learned best through scent trails, repetition, and rewards. The bones, they're for teaching grip control. The cloth pouch, for scent familiarization. The turnip, just for fun. Turns out ferrets enjoy chaos snacks and crawling into things they shouldn't like most toddlers, but with teeth sharper than social commentary at a medieval banquet. Here's the oddity for this section. In some parts of England, ferret trainers were required to register their animals with the local bailiff, especially if they lived near royal hunting grounds. Why? Because ferret theft was a legitimate problem. These creatures were valuable, quick to vanish, and occasionally prone to getting into the neighbors' flower stores. There's at least one case of a ferret trainer being fined for willful tunneling into adjacent property. Whether the ferret was charged too is unclear. Now, an academic curiosity: was ferret training passed down orally, or did manuals exist? Some historians argue for secret household scrolls of hunting tips, while others believe everything was taught by demonstration. Given that parchment was expensive, and ferrets are not known for reading, the oral tradition theory holds more ground. But wouldn't it be charming to discover an illustrated Codex Ferretis in a forgotten abbey somewhere? Back by the fire, Gertrude finishes the course and pokes her head out from under a log with a triumphant squeak. Dunstan beams like a proud uncle at a midsummer pie contest. You offer Gertrude a bit of dried apple. She accepts, then disappears into your boot. Welcome to the training phase. It's messy, unpredictable, and smells vaguely of old cheese, but it works. And if you're patient one day, your own ferret might save you from dinnerless disgrace in front of a hungry noble. Time for a few soft chuckles before you drift off. Why don't ferret trainers ever win arguments? Because their points keep getting lost in tunnels. What do you call a group of misbehaving ferrets? A fuzz riot. And why did the medieval bard write a song about a ferret? Because it had better rhythm than the tambourine player. Sleep well, fellow apprentice. Tomorrow we hunt turnips. Not for food, just for morale. A hunter's best secret. The morning mist hasn't lifted yet, and the fields wear a damp shawl of silence. You're awake before the bird's boots, still soggy from yesterday's hunt, and your ferret companion is curled at your side like a very long comma. No one else is stirring. And that's exactly how the nobles liked it: quiet, secretive, and with just the faintest scent of scandal. Because here's the truth: they didn't want circulating. The most efficient hunting weapon of the Middle Ages didn't bark bray or wear armor. It had whiskers, it fit in a sleeve, and it could make rabbits panic better than a bishop caught in a tavern. Ferrets were the noble hunter's best-kept secret, not because they were rare, but because they worked too well. In a society that prized spectacle, blaring horns, galloping steeds, and dramatic falcon dives, there was something almost embarrassing about getting results from something that looked like a sock with teeth, especially when that sock could outperform 3 dogs and a tired nephew. You're standing now at the edge of a noble's private warren. It's off limits to the peasants, marked by carved posts and an air of silent entitlement. The steward, who hasn't smiled since harvest, ushers you forward with the urgency of someone trying to keep secrets from the kitchen staff. Your mission today? A quiet hunt. The kind where nobody claps, no trumpets. Just you, a basket, and a ferret named Mildred, who once fell asleep mid-hunt and refused to come out for 2 days. Historical fact for your sleepy thoughts: hunting with ferrets was often kept low profile among the nobility because it blurred class lines. It was practical, accessible, and didn't involve 15 attendants and a fancy feast afterward. That made it dangerously close to something the lower classes could imitate, and we can't have that. Now can we? Some households even kept special hunting journals where ferret use was coded in flowery language. Instead of writing, "Sent in the ferret," you might see something like, "Release the small scout unto the burrow's darkened breath." Sounds poetic, but it's really just shorthand for Mildred chased 3 rabbits and ate 1. Speaking of Mildred, she's ready. She stretches yawns like she's just finished reading an extremely boring sermon and vanishes into the entrance. The steward watches nervously, already dabbing sweat from his brow. It's not that he doubts the ferret. It's that he's already promised the Lord's table a rabbit pie by noon. And rabbits, unlike gossip, don't serve themselves. Here's a weird little detail. In some regions, ferret burrow work was considered so vital that there were oaths taken before the hunt, little rhyming promises to return the ferret safely, to not steal the prey, and to not blame the ferret for your own mistakes. The rhyme goes something like, "Fur and fang to earth and back, I guide thee forth along thy track. Thou bring me rabbit fair and quick, and I'll not call thee lazy pick." Yes, that counts as poetry in the 1300s. Standards were different. Now, for the academic controversy of the night, some historians argue that ferret hunting became so common in noble circles, it eventually led to backlash hunting guilds, banning its use in certain events to preserve the honor of more traditional methods. Others argue this is overstated, and the bans were more about land disputes than honor. The truth, as always, is delightfully muddled. You crouch low as Mildred begins her performance. There's a rustle in the underbrush, a flash of fur. Then 3 rabbits, utterly disoriented, leap straight into the waiting net, like actors who forgot their lines. The steward gasps. You nod. Mildred reappears with a bit of grass stuck to her forehead and an expression that says she could have done it faster, but didn't want to embarrass anyone. This is how the secrets were kept, not through grand conspiracies, but through quiet efficiency. Through results that didn't need trumpet fanfare. Through creatures so effective that nobles whispered about them, but rarely invited them to banquets. Later, as you walk back toward the manor, Mildred curled around your neck like a very warm scarf. You wonder how many other secrets are buried in the hedgerows. How many inventions, ideas, and furry geniuses got tucked away in footnotes because they didn't fit the official story. But tonight we remember. Tonight we honor the secret weapon that was small, fuzzy, and a little bit dramatic. A few quiet laughs to end on. Why didn't the noble show off his ferret? He didn't want to give away his edge or his slippers. What's a ferret's favorite royal dish? Anything that used to run. And how do you keep a ferret secret? Whisper it through tunnels no one hears, above ground. Sleep softly now. The best things in history are sometimes the quietest. The ferret fashion scene. It's late afternoon in a noble's courtyard, and the world smells like rosewater roasted game and wet stone. You're perched beside a fountain shaped like a lion that's clearly never seen a real lion, and at your feet lies the most extravagantly dressed animal in the entire region. Yes, it's a ferret, wearing a cape. Not just any cape. This one is deep crimson, lined with rabbit fur, ironic but fashionable, and embroidered with tiny gold leaves. It trails slightly behind her when she walks like a royal robe on a very elongated monarch. Her name is Clarabelle, and she is the current muse of Lady Isolde, who insists that all her pets dress in accordance with the season and their station. Tonight is the spring festival. There will be dancing poetry and an inexplicably competitive vegetable carving contest. But for now, the nobles are gathered in their finest silks, and Clarabelle, the ferret, is strutting like she owns the manor. She might actually, there was some confusion about a will. See, medieval fashion wasn't just for people. For those who could afford it, and those who had far too much free time dressing up their animals, was both entertainment and status. While dogs often got leather collars, with Belle's ferrets inspired something more whimsical. Tiny vests, miniature hoods, capes that would flutter as they scampered down the banquet table. Yes, that happened. Here's your factual snack. There are surviving references from the 14th and 15th centuries to ferret garments being made by tailors who specialized in animal wear. Not a huge profession, granted, but real. One tailor in Burgundy was famously mocked for hemming sleeves for beasts, and he allegedly retaliated by hosting a ferret fashion parade in his shop. No word on whether the crowd stayed past intermission. Now, let's not pretend this was practical. Ferrets didn't need outfits, but nobles loved pageantry. And what's more delightful than a tiny wriggly creature in brocade, especially one that might leap into the soup course if unsupervised? And here's the quirk of the night. There was a brief trend, blessedly brief, of dyeing ferrets to match their outfits. Blue, red, even green. Not permanent dyes, thankfully. Mostly vegetable-based and often regretted. One chronicler noted that a green-tinted ferret caused 3 ladies to faint and 1 to compose a sonnet. Probably not in that order. Clarabelle, for her part, is handling the attention well. She's been paraded on a silver tray, nibbled on 3 different gloves, and napped in a noble's powdered wig. A fine evening. You, meanwhile, are tasked with keeping her entertained, but not muddy. This is harder than it sounds. You guide her gently around the edge of the courtyard, where a string quartet plays something that sounds like a lullaby, performed by drunk squirrels. Clarabelle twitches her ears in rhythm. She has taste. Let's pause for our academic quarrel of the evening. Some historians argue that stories of ferret fashion are exaggerated tales passed down as satirical jokes rather than reality. Others argue the opposite, that fashion for animals was far more common, especially in courts, with an obsession for novelty and spectacle. They point to inventories listing animal garments, including 1 sleeve set for a beast of chase. The debate, like a ferret in a drawer, remains elusive. You take a seat by the pastry table, strictly off limits to Clarabelle, and overhear 2 courtiers discussing their pets' summer wardrobes. One describes a matching bonnet for her chihuahua-sized hunting hawk. The other insists she once saw a goose in velvet trousers. You decide not to ask questions. Here's something oddly sweet among some noble households. Dressing up a ferret was seen as a blessing protection for the animal during important hunts. The outfit was a symbol of trust care and presumably a sense of humor. There's even a story of a lord who commissioned a winter cloak for his ferret made from fox fur and enchanted with a prayer. Whether it was enchanted with fleas remains undocumented as the evening deepens and lanterns flicker across the hedges. Clarabelle dozes in a pile of napkins, her cape still perfectly draped. The nobles dance. The musicians try a faster tune. You sip something warm and vaguely spiced, and the world feels quiet, silly, regal. And, to wrap up your sleepy chuckles, what do you call a ferret in designer clothes, a fur-lanthropist? Why didn't Clarabelle like her new cape? It clashed with the soup. And how do you spot a noble at a feast? Just follow the ferret in matching gloves. Sleep now, friend. May your dreams be stylish and mildly absurd. Rules of the ferret game. You're crouched behind a hedgerow that smells like damp time and social tension. To your left, a row of spectators holding meat pies and judgment. To your right, a hand-painted sign reading, "The Third Annual Warren Flush and Fancy Ferret Tournament." Ahead of you, a patch of earth that's about to become a competitive battleground of fluff teeth and deeply questionable medieval sportsmanship. Yes, it's a ferret competition. Not an official sport, mind, you at least not one recognized by any crown or church. But in these local circles, the stakes are high. Pride, bragging rights, and a cured ham for the winning team. You wouldn't believe how much drama a ham can cause. You're not alone. Your teammate is a wiry old man named Barrick, who smells faintly of mint and pipe smoke. He's brought his two best ferrets, named Thing and Also Thing. They're identical, except one has a slightly more judgmental stare. The rules are simple, or at least shouted vaguely by a man in a feathered hat. Flush out the most rabbits using only one ferret at a time. Nets must be laid without visible traps. No poking, prodding, or overly spiritual encouragement. And above all, no enchanted gloves. Yes, apparently that had to be said. Here's your history. Hit medieval hunting contests involving ferrets did exist, particularly at the manor level. They weren't always formal tournaments, more often impromptu bets between neighboring estates. But over time, traditions grew. Some included points for style, others for speed. And in a few rare cases, judges awarded ribbons. Small, edible ones. The whistle blows. Actually, it's a man yelling, "Go with extra flair." And Barrick releases Thing into the designated hole. You hold your breath. A hush falls, then jingling. Movement. Dust. Rabbits erupt from the far side like furry projectiles. Your net drops. A perfect catch. The crowd murmurs its approval. One small child claps. You nod solemnly as though this were not the single most ridiculous and delightful moment of your month. What's strange is how codified this all feels. There's an official ferret measuring stick, a jury cloak worn by the head judge. Someone is taking notes in a ledger made of bark. You even spot a support ferret sitting on a padded cushion, getting gently fanned by a novice monk. We don't ask questions here. Quirky detail. Time One surviving manor record from Kent lists a day of chasing hares with ferrets and blessings, yes blessings. Apparently a local friar would say a quick prayer over each ferret before they competed. It didn't improve their speed, but it made everyone feel less bad about cheering. Now here's the scholarly kerfuffle. Some argue these contests were part of a larger effort by minor nobility to build community and demonstrate responsible land use. Others say it was just bored people making a sport out of the only animals they had lying around. Probably both. The line between civic engagement and chaos has always been blurry. Back in the arena, it's time for the freestyle round. This involves sending the ferret through a maze of painted barrels and hay tunnels. Thing performs like a veteran smooth, focused only pausing once to scratch an existential itch. The crowd cheers. One man throws a pickled onion. Not out of anger. That's just how he celebrates. Barrick grumbles that in his youth, ferret games were a sacred art, and that people today are too concerned with flair. You point out that he brought capes for both of his ferrets. He claims that's for wind resistance. Your team places second overall, just behind a woman from the next village over who swears she trains her ferrets using lute music. She accepts her ham trophy with theatrical humility. Thing seems unimpressed. As the crowd disperses and the last of the applause drifts off into the hedges, you sit quietly, watching the late sun turn the fields gold. You've spent the day cheering on an animal smaller than a shoe in a tournament with no real prize. And yet somehow, you feel like you've witnessed something timeless. Silly, yes, but timeless. So tonight's chuckles are served with ribbons. Why don't ferrets enter archery contests? Because they always shoot under the target. What's the official ferret tournament cheer? Go small or go home. And how do you know a ferret took first place? It steals the medal and hides it in your boot. Sleep soundly and dream of trophies you never expected to win. Castle corridors and ferret chases. It's past midnight in the east wing of a half-forgotten castle, and you're not entirely sure whether you're here for a job, an adventure, or a very oddly assigned punishment. The torches have burned low, casting flickering shadows on damp stone walls, and your boots echo across flagstones worn smooth by centuries of pacing, fleeing, and regrettable decisions involving mead. But you're not alone. Beside you, eyes gleaming like two flecks of candlelight, is your partner in pest control, a ferret named Bran. Or perhaps Brawn. The castle scribe was sneezing when he wrote the name tag. This isn't a hunt in the fields. This is an interior mission. Tonight, you're chasing mice through the banquet halls of nobles, too proud to admit they have a rodent problem, and too cheap to keep a stable cat. Welcome to the world of indoor ferreting. Or as one lord allegedly called it, subtle vermin diplomacy. Ferrets weren't just outdoor hunters in the Middle Ages. In castles, abbeys, and manors, they were often used as stealthy mouse and rat removers, slipping behind tapestries, into pantries, and sometimes right under the bed of a sleeping noble. No one was ever fully at ease with that last part. You crouch beside a suit of armor that has seen better days. It's wearing a feather boa for some reason, and release Bran into a narrow gap beneath a cupboard. Within moments, you hear the scuffle of movement. A panicked squeak. Then silence. Historical truth time. While cats were often kept in castles for pest control, they had limitations. They napped too much, occasionally refused to chase anything, and were notoriously hard to train. Ferrets, on the other hand, could be guided, retrieved, and directed into the most inconvenient corners. Also, they worked for scraps of sausage. You follow Bran through a maze of storeroom staircases and one hallway that smells suspiciously like melted cheese. He moves with professional flare tail, high body, low ears, twitching at the slightest creak. You, on the other hand, keep bumping into furniture. Quirky detail, incoming in some castle's ferrets, were officially listed as castle staff. Not with pay, obviously, but they had assigned duties scheduled release times, and in one case, their own cupboard. That cupboard tragically was later mistaken for a bread box. You pass a servant wide-eyed, holding a candle stub. She nods at Bran, as though he's the actual authority figure here. She's not wrong. In these walls, your fuzzy partner is the one in charge. Now, for the academic debate, was indoor ferreting a widespread practice or a niche curiosity of overly tidy lords? Some scholars argue that it was only common in wealthier homes with stone architecture where rats were a serious threat to grain storage and reputation. Others believe it was more ad hoc if you had a ferret and a problem you made due. Either way, records show multiple instances of ferrets being borrowed from estates during rodent outbreaks. One letter from a disgruntled monk reads, "Please return our chase beast." The seller now trembles with whispers, which is probably the most poetic way anyone has ever described a mouse problem. Your candle flickers. You're deep now in the western pantry, where Bran has cornered a mouse behind a barrel of dried lentils. It's a standoff. You watch from a distance, unsure whether to intervene or applaud. Bran makes a darting lunge, the mouse squeals, and the chase continues through flour sacks, under a bench, and finally into your sack, which Bran casually enters as if he's clocking out for the night. You tie it closed. Another job well done. And here's your charming footnote. Ferrets used for indoor work were often fitted with tiny bells, not just for tracking, but so servants wouldn't accidentally step on them. There's even mention of a small embroidered warning sign, "Ferret at work. Mind thy ankles." You head back toward the kitchen sack over your shoulder, ferret tucked in your arm like a sleepy noodle. A maid offers you a slice of spiced pear tart in thanks. You accept. Bran gets a piece too. It's only fair. Tonight's amusement, brought to you by corridors and chaos. Why don't castles hire cats anymore? They keep unionizing. Ferrets, always freelance. How do you know a ferret's been in the pantry? The flour's missing, and there's a smug wiggle trail. And why do nobles trust ferrets more than servants? Ferrets don't gossip. They just dig. Sleep now with no scratching in the walls. The tunnels are cleared, for now. Portable ferret baskets. You're on the edge of a muddy crossroads, squinting at the gray sky, while your cloak tries its best to absorb all the moisture in Europe. Travel in the Middle Ages isn't glamorous. It's not romantic. It's mostly just soggy. But you carry something that makes it bearable, a basket. Not for bread. Not for maps. For ferrets. Yes, it's one of those baskets. The kind specially designed with breathing holes, straw lining, and sometimes a tiny embroidered cushion if the owner was particularly proud or particularly lonely. Because when you're traveling across rough terrain to hunt, visit an estate, or show off at a local fair, you don't just bring a ferret, you present it. Let's talk design. These baskets came in several styles: the over-the-shoulder sling for discreet nobility, the belt pouch model for hands-free pest control, and the classic double-latch carrier for serious professionals who needed their ferrets to arrive unwrinkled. Some were made from willow, others from leather. One surviving sketch even shows a ferret poking its head from what looks suspiciously like a modified wine jug. You kneel by the side of the road and lift the lid slightly. Inside, two sleepy eyes blink up at you. This one's named Tittle, or Puddle. The ink smudged. Either way, she's warm, dry, and completely unaware of how ridiculous her travel accessories look to outsiders. Here's your historical fact. transportable ferret baskets were mentioned in several estate inventories across England and northern France during the 13th to 15th centuries. They were considered field essentials, especially for hunters or estate managers. One inventory lists one basket for the beasts of tunnel 3 strings for netting and a horn of powder against the itch. Useful, disturbing, and efficient. And here's the strange little aside: ferret baskets weren't just practical. They became low-key status symbols. Embellished baskets implied wealth access to skilled weavers, and most importantly, a certain lifestyle, the kind where your ferret had nicer luggage than most humans. One noble even commissioned a silver inlaid hinge and had the basket's lid engraved with a family crest. His ferret was named Percival, and allegedly once bit a bishop. Prestige confirmed. Back to you now, traveling with Tittle, or possibly Puddle, making your way to a small hamlet where the mice have started treating the granary like a vacation villa. You swing the basket gently from your arm. As you walk, its faint rustling, a soft reassurance that your furry agent is awake and likely plotting something. The villagers welcome you with mild suspicion and very enthusiastic bread. You're shown to a granary door that creaks ominously. A single mouse scampers past your boot like it owns the place. Not for long. You set down the basket, unlatch the lid, and with a small thwump, your sleepy agent tumbles out, stretches dramatically, and disappears behind a sack of barley with the elegance of a drunken sock. Here's where scholars squabble. Was the use of ferret baskets truly widespread, or were they limited to certain regions or social classes? Some argue that common folk used makeshift sacks or simply carried ferrets in their sleeves. Yes, really. Others suggest the baskets were a middle-class solution, functional but fanciful. The truth likely falls somewhere between everybody had one and only the weirdly devoted. Meanwhile, back in the granary, things are happening. Fast. You hear the classic chaos sequence: scratch, squeak, flap of burlap, slight crash. Then your ferret emerges, dragging something vaguely mouse-shaped and entirely indignant. Success. You reward her with a bit of cheese and tuck her gently back into the basket, where she immediately curls into a smug cinnamon roll of fluff and judgment. Before leaving, one of the elders offers you a gift, a ferret scarf. Not for you. For the ferret. It's knitted from wool, smells faintly of goats, and has her name probably stitched along the side. She will hate it, but you accept it graciously because it's the thought and the historical quirk that counts. And now, a few giggles for the road. Why don't ferrets carry their own baskets? Because they can't agree on who gets to steer. What do you call a traveling ferret with luggage, a whisker nomad? And what's a ferret's least favorite travel companion? A rooster with boundary issues. The road stretches ahead. The basket swings gently, and history, as always, rides in small, squeaky compartments. When Ferret saved the feast, you're inside a Manor kitchen just before sunset, and everything is teetering on the edge of culinary disaster. A feast is underway. Candles are lit. Minstrels are warming up their lutes. And somewhere in the great hall, a nobleman is already 3 goblets into a story about a dragon that was probably just a cow in a fog. But here in the kitchen, the mood is tense. Something is wrong. Not with the roast. Not with the wine. It's the rabbits. Or rather, the lack thereof. See, tonight's centerpiece is a grand rabbit pie. Flaky crust, herbs, a glazed carrot shaped like a rose. It's been hyped for weeks. The Manor's cook has even been pacing in his sleep, muttering about layered onions and destiny. But this morning, the cages were empty. every rabbit gone. Vanished like dignity at a midsummer fair. Suspicion falls on the children first, then the steward, then the stable boy who insists he thought they were special training goats. But the truth is simpler. The latch was old. The wind blew it open. And now there are rabbits loose on the grounds, nibbling roots, taunting dogs, and burrowing under hedges like they're late for a vegetable-themed masquerade. Enter you and your ferret, his name, Gaspar. Slender, alert, and currently sniffing a carrot with deep suspicion. The cook pleads with you half in desperation, half in reverent awe. You nod slowly, the kind of nod that says, "I've got this." Then you tie on a napkin like a cloak, because theatrics matter. You step outside into the garden, where evidence of the great escape is everywhere. Nibbled lettuce, suspicious holes. One rabbit has even left paw prints on a cooling pie tin, like it wanted to leave a calling card. You release Gaspar near the main burrow and whisper a short blessing. Something like, "May your nose be sharp and your paws even sharper." He doesn't acknowledge it. He's already vanished into the hedge. Here's your factual nibble for tonight. Trained ferrets were sometimes used not only for hunting, but also for recovery. In cases like this, when livestock went rogue or prey, animals escaped confinement, ferrets were deployed like tiny whiskered shepherds. A few chronicles refer to them as keepers of the chase, though this title was likely honorary and possibly sarcastic. Inside, the feast preparations continue. But without the pie, morale is plummeting. A bard is rewriting a love song into a ballad about lentils. A noblewoman asks if quail is still emotionally satisfying. And the cook is now staring into the fire like it insulted his lineage. Back outside, Gaspar works. You follow the rustling. Occasionally, you see flashes of fur. A rabbit bolts, then another. They don't get far cornered by garden walls and confused by the herb spiral. You scoop them up gently, one by one, placing them into a borrowed laundry basket. Gaspar returns briefly for a snack, then disappears again, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are absolutely carrying this evening. Quirky aside. In at least one record from a French estate, a ferret was awarded an honorary supper seat after helping rescue an entire coop of chickens from a fox-infested brush. It sat on a small stool and was fed bits of cheese during dinner. The stool had its name carved into it. Aristocrats were weird. The scholars' debate of the evening: could ferrets be trained for retrieval? Or was this more instinct than strategy? Some argue that ferrets' success came purely from their love of chase, not loyalty. Others point to training methods involving Bell's scent rewards and sheer stubborn repetition. Likely, it was both. Medieval handlers understood their animals not always kindly, but often deeply. By now, you've recovered 6 rabbits. One tries to escape. Gaspar blocks it with a lazy flop. Another tries to dig. He paws it back out like a gardener unimpressed by amateur work. You return to the kitchen, a hero. The cook gasps, thanks you in 3 languages, and offers to name a pastry after you. Gaspar is offered the first bite of pie filling, after the nobles. Of course, protocol must be upheld, and yes, the feast is saved. The pie arrives to cheers. Gaspar is curled up by the hearth, dreaming of tunnels and applause. So tonight's bedtime giggles come with a puff of pastry. What did the ferret say to the runaway rabbit? You picked the wrong salad to mess with. Why did the feast almost fail? Because the rabbits pulled a fast one, literally. And what do you call a pie rescued by a ferret? a flaky miracle. Rest well. Let no feast go unserved. Let no rabbit go unfetched. Churches, ferrets, and morality. The chapel is quiet tonight. Too quiet, really, if you ask Gaspar, your ferret companion who keeps attempting to crawl under the pews in protest. Candles flicker in sconces shaped like angels, with tired expressions, and somewhere in the apse, a monk is humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like the drinking song from the tavern down the road. You're here not for confession, but for clarification. See, the clergy have questions, serious questions, about ferrets. They've heard the rumors that these creatures are used in the fields to drive rabbits from burrows, that they've been invited into noble halls, that one of them allegedly wore a velvet hat and was knighted during a winter feast. This last part is still unconfirmed, though Gaspar certainly carries himself like he believes it. But the real issue, morality, ethics, is using a ferret to flush a rabbit. Honest? Is it sporting? And more importantly, does it offend divine balance? You'd think they'd have bigger things to worry about, like famine or poorly translated hymnals. But here we are. Here's your historical morsel in certain parts of medieval Europe. Especially during the 12th and 13th centuries, the church began questioning specific hunting practices, not just who could hunt, but how. Tools that gave too much advantage were frowned upon. This included nets, traps, and yes, animals that made things too easy. Theological logic went something like this. If God gave the rabbit its wits and legs, is it right to overwhelm that with a long, slinky weasel that cheats by going underground? Shouldn't the chase be fair? Noble, glorious ferrets, unfortunately, do not care about any of these things. They care about burrows, bellies, and naps. One bishop is particularly distressed. He's heard that ferrets are being used during Lent to gather meat, technically sidestepping fasting laws. You assure him this is not your intent. Gaspar, at that exact moment, chooses to yawn dramatically. The bishop is unimpressed. Now here's the weird part. Some monasteries used ferrets themselves. Yep. While the church publicly debated the ethics, certain orders quietly kept ferrets to manage vermin. It was like a medieval version of do as I say, not as I flee. One record from an abbey in Flanders describes a ferret named Felix, who was so effective at catching mice, he was given his own sleeping cubby and a bowl inscribed with Felix non gratis humorous. Felix ungrateful to mice. So yes, moral ambiguity was alive and well in medieval cloisters. Meanwhile, you're seated before the council, which includes 2 monks, 1 friar, and a nun, who looks like she's absolutely rooting for the ferret. They ask whether your use of Gaspar is respectful to nature. You reply that Gaspar only chases what he chooses, and often lets rabbits go if they look like they've had a rough day. One monk frowns. The nun smiles. Quirky sidebar. In some localities, ferrets were subject to feast day restrictions. You couldn't use them on Sundays or near certain shrines. One town even banned ferret hunting on St. Gertrude's Day, claiming the creatures distract from the solemnity of pies. That's a real quote. The scholarly squabble here is this. Did the church's official stance ever fully ban ferret hunting? Some say yes, citing sermons condemning dishonest tools of the chase. Others argue that the condemnations were more about excess than the animals themselves. After all, no council ever excommunicated a ferret that we know of. Back in the chapel, the friar reads aloud from a hunting guide written by a monk who seems to both admire and deeply mistrust ferrets. It calls them creatures of cunning disposition, best employed with watchful mercy, which is a very roundabout way of saying don't blame the ferret for being good at its job. Eventually, the meeting ends, not with a judgment, but a shrug. They thank you for your honesty. Gaspar receives a small biscuit from the nun. It's shaped like a fish. He eats it under the altar. As you leave, the bishop reminds you not to hunt during holy hours. You promised to try. Gaspar promptly chases a beetle out the door. And now, a few divine chuckles to end this ecclesiastical evening. Why did the bishop dislike ferrets? Too much sneak and not enough sacrifice. What hymn do ferrets sing? Burrow, burrow, bless thy chase. And why did the nun favor Gaspard? Because he never interrupted vespers. Just squeaked politely. Sleep now, with candlelight in your dreams, and no theological debates under your bed. Smuggling with a side of fur. You're sitting on the back of a hay cart, trundling through a foggy border crossing, pretending to be a perfectly innocent tradesperson transporting root vegetables. And in a way you are. There's definitely a turnip in there. Somewhere. Buried beneath sacks of straw, and an extremely suspicious ferret named Larkspur, who keeps trying to chew through the twine. Larkspur isn't here for rabbit hunting today. She's here because you've been paid in coin and cheese to help a merchant smuggle something very, very taxable across a duchy border. And when it comes to slipping through tight spaces, going unnoticed, and causing small but effective distractions, nobody does it better than a ferret. Yes, welcome to the shadowy underworld of medieval smuggling, where long tunnels, hidden pouches, and furry accomplices played more of a role than the average nightly saga would dare admit. Here's your history fix. While there isn't a scroll titled How to Commit Ferret-Based Crimes, there are enough offhand mentions in legal documents to suggest that ferrets were sometimes involved in illicit activities. Why? Because unlike people horses, or conspicuously large barrels labeled not wine, a ferret could slip through cracks in fortress walls, carry messages or contraband, and even create enough noise in a guardroom to provide the perfect distraction. Larkspur has done this before, judging by the way she climbs into the false bottom of the grain sack like she's clocking in for a shift. Inside, a sealed pouch of spice. Not a huge amount, but enough to avoid 3 layers of tariffs, and enough for the merchant to buy a new wagon wheel and a particularly smug hat. The academic debate here is less about whether ferrets were actually used for smuggling and more about how often. Some historians argue these tales are mostly folklore exaggerated stories about clever peasants and animal trickery. Others point to estate records where fines were levied for beast-assisted border evasion. Whatever the truth, it's clear someone somewhere was creative enough to give a ferret a job and a mission. You pass the checkpoint with a nod and a half wave. The guard is mostly interested in your turnips. They look dry and doesn't seem to notice the small pair of eyes blinking out from the straw near your boot. Once across the line, you stop in a clearing and open the hidden compartment. Larkspur emerges with the pouch still perfectly intact. You hand it to the merchant, who drops a few coins in your palm, gives the ferret a respectful bow, and disappears into the mist, like someone in a ballad who's never paying taxes again. Quirky detail of the night. In parts of northern Italy, there are folk tales of ghost ferrets who could pass through walls and bring luck to smugglers. In these stories, feeding your ferret well and brushing its fur kept the spirits happy. Neglect it, and your next barrel of goods might arrive suspiciously empty. Of course not. All smuggling was noble. Some records mention more dubious uses like slipping letters into enemy territory or transporting powdered substances of questionable medical value. But let's not worry about those tonight. Let's stick with turnips and spices. And cheese. You make camp beneath a twisted oak fire crackling low. Larkspur curls beside your satchel tail draped like a tiny scarf. She's earned her rest. You wonder briefly if any nobles suspected their pampered hunting companions were occasionally moonlighting as freelance couriers. Probably not. Nobles aren't known for checking inside their own baskets. One last scholarly note. A 14th century poem from the Low Countries references a whiskered thief of borders, likely referring to a ferret. It's unclear whether the poet was condemning or admiring the creature. Probably both. Medieval people were deeply conflicted about cleverness. Now for your nightly smuggled-in chuckles. Why don't ferrets pay tolls? Because they always take the underground route. What's a ferret's favorite kind of coin? The ones hidden in socks. And why was Larkspur the best in the business? Because no one suspects the noodle with paws. Sleep well tonight. Your secrets are safe, and your pockets hopefully are ferret-free. Ferrets on the Manor payroll. It's early morning, and the dew hasn't even decided if it wants to stick around yet. The fields are quiet. The manor is quieter. And you're holding a very official-looking scroll with your name on it. And beside that, a second scroll, addressed to your ferret. That's right. The manor has officially recognized your tiny companion as staff. Welcome to the rare but very real world of medieval employment for animals. Ferrets didn't just work, they got listed, accounted for. In some estates, they even received rations housing, and yes, occasional bonuses. Your ferret today, it's Mopsy. Although yesterday, it might have been Rupert, has made it onto the payroll. Here's your documented delight on some manorial rolls. From the 14th century, there are entries that list wages paid not just to the hunter, but also to the keeper of ferrets, or the ferret master. Sometimes it's indirect entries, like cheese for the beast straw, for the den, or payment for ferret meat. Don't panic. That usually meant food for the ferret, not of the ferret. We hope, at one estate, the ledger shows, to Janin for mending the basket of the weasel beast, 2 pence. To the same cheese and dried fig for said creature on account of work done. Yes, your ferret just got paid in figs. That's more than some peasants. You're in the steward's office now, which smells like wax ink and mild disappointment. He's squinting at the parchment lips pursed, not because he disapproves, but because he's trying to figure out if the ferret's signature is supposed to be a paw print or just cheese smudge. And here's where the practicality kicks in. Keeping a healthy, effective, working ferret required care. Feeding, warmth, a well-made pouch or basket. And if you were managing a large estate with rabbit populations, constantly trying to turn your gardens into burrow cities, having a dedicated ferret team wasn't just smart, it was necessary. The steward finally nods and pulls out a tiny cloth token, this Manor's version of an ID badge. He sews it to your satchel, where Mopsy promptly chews on it in approval. You're official. More importantly, she's official. Now, for the academic dispute of the day, was the idea of paying animals just a poetic flourish in the records, or were ferrets truly considered employees in a practical sense? Some argue it was symbolic and extension of honoring the animal's role. Others claim it reflected a nuanced medieval view of animal agency. Either way, It's hard to argue when your pet gets a fig and a half day off. Quirky side tale. In one English village, the ferret known as Ambrose was given a ribbon and a day of praise after successfully clearing out an entire monastery's granary. The celebration included music, a small feast, and what may or may not have been a tiny paper crown. There's no record of Ambrose's opinion, but we assume he wore it sideways like a true professional. You spend the rest of the morning escorting Mopsy through her duties, checking burrows along the manor fence, inspecting hay storage, and performing the very important task of startling a rooster who had gotten too comfortable. It's a full day's work. By mid-afternoon, she's back in her lined pouch, snoring gently, with one paw over her face. The manor's servants pass you with respectful nods. One offers you a bowl of stew. Another quietly asks if Mopsy is accepting apprentices. You pretend to consider it, and tonight's chuckles come with an ink-stained ledger. Why don't ferrets complain about wages? Because they're paid in naps and admiration. What's a ferret's idea of a raise, an extra fig, and permission to chew the steward's hat? And what's the official job title for a working ferret tunnel operations executive? Obviously, sleep soundly, fellow staff. You've earned it. And don't forget to submit your hours. Noble ferret funerals. The rain is gentle today, the kind that taps on cloak hoods and stone windows like a bored bard rehearsing a lullaby. You're standing at the edge of the herb garden, holding a small box fashioned from walnut wood, its lid carved with vines and paws. Around you, 6 people are gathered: 3 noble ladies, 1 steward, a kitchen boy, and a monk who looks vaguely confused about why he was invited. The air is solemn. A hush has settled. Someone clears their throat dramatically. The cook sneezes, and then the ceremony begins. You are at a funeral for a ferret. Her name was Matilda. She lived a long and glorious life, chasing rabbits, startling visiting dignitaries, and once allegedly saving the youngest lordling from a runaway goose. She wore a green velvet collar, had a favorite napping cushion, and according to the lady of the manor, could detect spoiled cheese just by sniffing it and walking away in judgment. Today, Matilda is being buried beneath a rose bush, next to 2 previous ferrets, Geoffrey and Beatrice, and a goose no one misses. It sounds whimsical, even absurd, but here's your history. Fact: medieval people, particularly nobles, did hold ceremonies for beloved animals. Dogs, horses, falcons, and yes, even ferrets were honored for their loyalty and service. While most animals were not considered equals, they were still remembered, especially if they had personalities, peculiar habits, or matching accessories. One household record mentions the burying of the chase weasel with song and cider. Another includes a line item for the carving of a wooden likeness of our faithful hunter. That's right, tiny memorial statues, usually tucked in herb gardens or under orchard trees. You place Matilda's box gently in the soil. The monk says something halfway between a blessing and a gardening tip. The lady of the house reads a poem she definitely wrote herself. It rhymes ferret with merit, twice. It's strangely touching. The children of the manor have tied ribbons to the rosemary bush above the grave. One has made a wreath of thistle and dandelion fluff. You hear whispers of whether Matilda will be reborn as a hedgehog or a nun. Theology gets fuzzy when animals are involved. And here's your quirky footnote: in one region of Burgundy, a local tradition involved planting mint over the graves of working ferrets to sweeten their sleep. Whether this was practical ferrets Do smell bless them, or symbolic is unclear. Either way, it's oddly beautiful. Now for the academic squabble. Were these funerals common practice or eccentric indulgences? Scholars are divided. Some claim they were rare, performed only by especially sentimental families. Others argue they were more widespread, but simply underrecorded because who in the middle of plague seasons and wars had time to write down every tiny funeral? But anecdotal evidence persists. Monks mentioning the weasel of the cellar cooks, requesting a day off to mourn the little red one, even court jesters making jokes about attending more ferret burials than human ones. The ceremony ends with a toast, warm cider passed in wooden cups. A small dish is poured onto the earth. The children promise to visit the grave weekly. The kitchen boy swears he saw Matilda's spirit in the shadows of the pantry already. The monk wisely says nothing. You walk back toward the manor, slowly feeling both silly and satisfied. There's something oddly comforting about a world where even a ferret gets a send-off, where the small, the helpful, and the persistently mischievous are remembered in song cider and thistle crowns. Mopsy, still alive, currently chewing your laces, seems entirely unfazed by all of this. And, for your soft smile this evening, why don't ferrets fear death? Because they always come back as house spirits with opinions. What do you call a ferret's funeral speech, a whisker eulogy? And why do nobles bury ferrets with ribbons? Because no good hunter goes underground underdressed. Sleep well tonight. The garden is quiet. The memories are tucked in. Fur fame and feuds. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the manor courtyard is already buzzing. Two carts stand wheel to wheel, their drivers glaring at each other like it's a duel at dawn. A steward is wringing his hands. The cook has come out holding a ladle like a weapon. And somewhere, someone is loudly insisting, "That is definitely my ferret." Welcome to the Great Ferret Feud. At the center of this diplomatic crisis is a single creature, scruffy, slender, and utterly indifferent to the commotion. Her name is Elfrida, or possibly Agnes. That's the problem. Both parties swear she belongs to them. And in a world where a good working ferret is worth more than 3 chickens and a mild social favor, ownership disputes get intense. Today's task isn't catching rabbits. It's navigating medieval legal drama, starring one fuzzy defendant. Here's your historical fact to start with. Ferret ownership in the Middle Ages wasn't always casual. These animals were valuable tools of the trade, trained, fed, and in some cases, even registered. Theft of a ferret could lead to fines, loss of hunting privileges, or in more dramatic cases, full-on brawls between neighboring estates. And yes, there are records. One 14th century document from Yorkshire details a dispute over a hunting beast of the whole, with both parties calling witnesses to testify to the ferret's sleeping habits, favorite snacks, and whether or not it snored like a small knight. The verdict: it was ruled a community ferret to be shared seasonally, like a very reluctant loaf of bread. Back to your courtyard now. The argument has escalated. Someone brings out a ferret whistle. The ferret ignores it. Someone else offers cheese. The ferret sniffs, sneezes, and resumes grooming. She is not impressed. She is above this quirky historical tidbit. In certain noble circles, there were actual ferret tournaments, not the kind with rabbits, but shows of skill tricks and beauty. The winner received a velvet-lined carrier and a gold-threaded collar. These ferrets gained reputations, and reputations, of course, led to imitators and forgeries. Yes, ferret forgeries. There's at least one account of a peasant dyeing his ferret to resemble a champion in order to sell it to an unsuspecting lord. The ruse lasted 3 days until the dye began to flake, and the ferret in protest shredded an entire tapestry. Now here's the academic debate. How seriously did medieval people take animal disputes? Some historians believe it was all symbolic ferrets as extensions of family honor and land rights. Others argue these cases mattered economically, especially in rural regions, where one good hunter could make a difference in winter food stores. Either way, Elfrida Agnes is now sitting on a barrel, looking pleased with herself. You, as the Manor's neutral party and official ferret wrangler, are called upon to mediate. You ask the only reasonable question in these cases: whose glove does she sleep in? Both hands go up, of course. So you try a test. You lay out a row of objects: gloves, scraps of cloth, bits of apple. Then you place a small hat she's known to hate. If she avoids the hat and chooses the old red glove, it's settled. Everyone watches, breathless. You whisper, "No pressure." She sniffs the hat, sneezes, and drags the red glove under the cart. Case closed. The loser mutters something about sorcery. The winner beams. The ferret gets a small wheel of cheese and zero understanding of the drama she just resolved. Later that day, you write a note in the Manor's ledger. Ferret, known as Elfrida, confirmed in household. No further disputes. Preference for red glove remains. And just like that, a minor border feud is dodged. The cheese is shared. The carts roll on. And now, 3 jesty jabs for the evening. Why did the ferret get summoned to court? Because she had too much appeal. What's a noble's worst fear? Losing a ferret and an argument in the same hour. And how do you settle a ferret feud glove grace and possibly a snack bribe? Sleep easy tonight. The court is adjourned. The glove is claimed, and the hat remains unchewed. The ferret tax scandal. The market square is unusually tense today. No musicians, no jesters. Not even the guy who usually sells suspicious sausages from a cart that definitely used to be a coffin. Instead, everyone's gathered around the notice board, where a new decree has just been nailed up in bold official lettering. A tax upon working ferrets is now in effect. Pay accordingly. A collective groan rises from the crowd. Somewhere, a baby starts crying. A rooster faints. And at the center of it all, you're clutching your ferret named Clementine today, who is snoozing contentedly in your pocket, blissfully unaware that she has just become a taxable asset. Yes, friend, you've just stepped into the most absurd and perfectly medieval kind of chaos the time ferrets got taxed. Here's your history fix. While there's limited documentation of direct ferret taxes, medieval tax systems were delightfully creative. Animals were often counted as part of one's property or productivity tally, especially if they contributed to hunting, farming, or somewhat alarmingly local superstition. Ferrets, being productive little tunnel crawlers, were sometimes lumped in with hunting dogs, traps, and falcons under what historians refer to as tool and beast levies. In some towns, a ferret fee was implemented during particularly tight economic seasons. The logic: if you had a trained ferret, you were catching more meat than your neighbor. Therefore, you were doing too well. Therefore, the crown would like some coin, please, and thank you. Back in the square, tempers are rising. A baker claims his ferret only chases rats, not rabbits, and therefore should be exempt. A weaver insists her ferret is strictly ornamental. You, clearly losing your grip on your own restraint, ask whether the baron intends to tax socks next if they're warm enough to count as comfort. The steward doesn't laugh. Meanwhile, Clementine has climbed into the hood of your cloak and is now peeking over your shoulder like a furry accountant inspecting loopholes. Here's your quirky gem. A manor in Western England reportedly tried to enforce a ferret registration policy. Each working ferret had to be tagged, weighed, and described in physical detail. One creature pale with darkened paws and quick eyes. Locals protested by swapping ferrets weekly. Chaos ensued. The records abruptly stopped 2 months later, either because the policy was abandoned or someone lost the ferret ledger in a river. Now, let's enjoy the scholarly scuffle. Some academics believe these taxes were rare, mostly theoretical, or quickly repealed. Others argue that ferret taxation was part of a broader pattern of regulating working animals to track wealth indirectly. The truth, as always, may lie in a muddy middle, short-lived, frustrating, and mostly ignored. Except, not today. Today, the steward is going house to house with a tally sheet. And you're hiding in the stables with 6 ferrets and a very old cloak that technically counts as a disguise. You consider your options. Claim your ferrets are religious pilgrims. Insist they're just elongated hamsters. Start a protest. Instead, you opt for a middle ground strategy paperwork. You return to the manor with a document forged from 3 unrelated scrolls, claiming that Clementine is temporarily reassigned as a textile inspection creature. You add a wax seal made from the bottom of a cheese mold. It works. Probably because the steward has already had to argue with 2 falconers, a beekeeper, and a man insisting his goose is tax-exempt under maritime law. Clementine, ever professional, yawns and resumes chewing on the corner of the document. By evening, a counter-petition has formed. Over 40 villagers have signed it, including a goat. No one knows who trained the goat, but its signature is better than half the humans. And finally, your sleepy chuckles for this tax-heavy tale. Why did the ferret refuse to pay taxes? Because it already gave at the burrow. What's the official currency of a working ferret? Cheese coins and soft blankets. And how do you audit a ferret carefully? They bite. Rest well tonight. Your assets are safe, for now. Pocket-sized patrols. It's a drizzly evening in a monastery just outside the village. The rain taps gently on the leaded windows, like a monk who's 5 minutes late to vespers and too polite to knock twice. The halls smell like parchment, old beeswax, and recently burned bread. But despite the calm, something's not right. The grain stores are dwindling faster than they should. Loaves are disappearing from the cooling shelves. A wheel of cheese has been found hollow with tiny bite marks around the edges. The culprit, not a thief. Not a lazy novice with a midnight snack problem. No, it's mice. And so, you were summoned. Not with trumpets or scrolls, but with a simple message on a piece of cloth tied to a chicken-long story. The monks have had enough. They need help. Quiet, efficient, nocturnal help. And that means one thing: your ferret. Her name is Peaches. She's compact, slightly dramatic, and currently wearing a makeshift cowl made from an old sock. She's ready for her sacred mission. Here's your historical insight for the evening. While cats were certainly kept in monasteries, ferrets were occasionally used for pest control in places where silence was golden and stealth was prized. Monks needed their manuscripts whole, their bread untouched, and their nights mouse-free. And cats, well, cats come with opinions. Ferrets come with results. You kneel near the cellar door as Brother Aldrich, the monastery's designated guardian of storage, unlocks it with the gravity of someone revealing state secrets. Inside, barrel sacks and a quiet tension. You release Peaches. She bounds forward with the confidence of a creature who knows she will not be thanked properly, but will do her duty anyway. And then silence. Here's the quirky detail. Some monasteries kept detailed logs of grain storage, and in the margins, you'll occasionally find little notes like weasel deployed or beast of burrow handled the flour theft. These brief entries hint at a world where ferrets had unofficial but respected roles in monastic life. One record even mentions a ferret named Benedict who received a small bowl of milk in thanks for devotion. Meanwhile, you and Brother Aldrich wait upstairs. He offers you stale bread and herbal tea that tastes suspiciously like regret. You hear nothing for 10 minutes. Then a thump, a squeak, the faintest rustle. Peaches reemerges with two very guilty-looking mice and a piece of stolen apple. Brother Aldrich gasps. He offers Peaches a blessing. She sneezes in response. Let's take a scholarly detour. Some historians argue that using ferrets in holy spaces was frowned upon due to associations with wildness and unruliness. Others argue the opposite, that ferrets were seen as divine tools, orderly, efficient, and blessedly quiet. After all, the Book of Hours says nothing against small furry creatures with excellent problem-solving skills. The monastery adopts Peaches for the week. She's given a small sleeping nook near the scriptorium and a nameplate made from an old bookmark. One novice is convinced she can read. Another swears she bowed during evening prayers. By the third night, the mice are gone. The pantry is whole. The cheese wheel remains unchewed. Brother Aldrich composes a hymn in her honor. It's mostly humming. And here's your sleepy chuckle trio. What's a ferret's favorite prayer? Deliver us from nibblers. Why did the abbot like Peaches? Because she respected the silence and didn't steal ink. And what do you call a ferret who guards the grain? A friar weasel. Sleep soundly tonight. The halls are quiet. The pantry is safe. And Peaches stands watch in the shadows. Ferret diplomacy. You're standing in a candlelit hall, draped in velvet and awkward tension. A delegation from a neighboring duchy has arrived, complete with heralds, ceremonial bread, and the kind of smiles that say, "We come in peace, unless the cheese is bad." This is no ordinary visit. This is a diplomatic dinner, and you inexplicably are holding a ferret with a ribbon tied around its neck. Her name is Sybil. She's twitchy elegant and the subject of great political concern. Because tonight she is a gift. Yes, really. Welcome to the strange, slightly furry world of ferret diplomacy. When alliances were fragile treaties, slippery, and noble egos, larger than their castles, sometimes a peace offering had to be unconventional. And nothing says, let's not invade each other this spring, quite like a prized ferret in formal wear. Your historical fact for this curious night animal gifting was common in medieval diplomacy. Falcons, horses, exotic pets, even bears poorly thought out, often regretted. But in a few lesser-known exchanges, ferrets made appearances, especially prized ones with unusual coloring, excellent training, or an alleged gift for catching thieves. One noblewoman referred to her gifted ferret as the quiet ambassador. Back in the hall, Sybil sits calmly in your gloved hands. The visiting lord eyes her with a mix of admiration and mild confusion. His steward, however, nods approvingly. Word is, the lord's granaries have been suffering from a mouse infestation, and ferret solutions are all the rage in courtly circles. You bow, extend Sybil like a particularly alive bouquet, and recite your practiced lines. As a sign of trust and clean pantries, we offer Sybil, trained of paw and pure of purpose. The room waits. Sybil sneezes delicately. The Lord laughs. The treaty is signed. Now here's the academic dispute. Were these animal gifts symbolic or strategic? Some scholars argue they were meant as curiosities, conversation starters, and polite distractions. Others believe they served very real purposes: pest control, companionship, even espionage. More on that in a future tale, perhaps. There's even one record of a gifted ferret sparking an unintended feud when it escaped during a feast and bit the toe of a baroness from another house. The resulting scandal included 3 duels, a ruined tapestry, and a poem titled The Whiskered Betrayal, none of which were Sybil's fault. Different ferret, same attitude. Quirky fact for the road: certain families bred ferrets specifically for gifting. Pale fur was prized. Curled tails were considered lucky. And if the ferret could dance or at least stand dramatically while music played, it was basically guaranteed a seat near the high table. Back at your own estate, the next morning's messenger arrives with good news. Not only was the treaty accepted, but Sybil has already caught 2 mice and napped on a duke's favorite cloak. She is, in the words of the note, the only diplomatic envoy who actually fixed something. You smile. Another crisis averted by fur. Now, for tonight's trio of courtly chuckles. Why did the diplomat bring a ferret? Because treaties are better when they come with whiskers. What's a ferret's idea of a peace offering? A mouse on a velvet napkin. And how do you say thank you in ferret diplomacy? With a blink a bite and a very prompt nap. Sleep easy tonight. The borders are calm. The pantry is mouse-free. And somewhere, Sybil dreams of ribbons and political stability. Many hunters on the move. The hunting horns haven't sounded yet, but the forest already hums with anticipation. You're standing at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by noblemen adjusting their gloves, pages holding falcons, and one woman inspecting her crossbow like it owes her money. It's a mobile hunt today, a roving event across several estates, and for the first time, your ferrets are part of the official entourage. 3 of them, to be exact: Pip and Maud, and something you affectionately call Sir Whiskers, because he once refused to come out of a jug until someone addressed him with a title. They're not walking, of course. They're riding. In a custom-built cart. Yes, this is what wealth looks like. A wooden ferret chariot lined with sheepskin, fitted with miniature curtains and air holes drawn behind your horse, like the most ridiculous VIP lounge in the medieval world. Here's your history. Fact: noble hunts were elaborate affairs. While dogs and horses took center stage, smaller animals, particularly ferrets, were sometimes brought along as burrow specialists. These hunts move fast and far, often through uneven terrain. So how do you bring a sleepy, semi-nocturnal creature to a multi-hour outdoor spectacle? You build it a mobile home. Manorial records mention beast baskets with wheels carrier trays for the small furred hunters, and in one particularly well-funded case, a ferret pavilion with 4 clasps of bronze and a window for the sun. Overkill maybe, but this is a time when someone once put shoes on a chicken and called it performance art. Your trio rides comfortably behind you. Pippin naps. Maud chews on the curtains. Sir Whiskers stands upright the entire time, as if personally judging the saddle quality of every nobleman you pass. The hunt begins at midday. Rabbits scatter. The hounds bark. Nobles give chase. And then comes your moment. A page calls for the tunnel crew, and you wheel your cart into the thicket like a shopkeeper at a particularly strange traveling market. You set the basket down, open the latch, release the fluff. Your ferrets dive into the burrows like professionals. Within minutes, rabbits begin darting from holes. Nets drop. Cheers go up. One lord toasts your team with his wine cup, then immediately regrets it when Maud climbs up his boot to see if there's cheese involved. Quirky note of the day. Some traveling hunts assigned ferrets their own handlers, not just for deployment, but for care and comfort. These handlers were expected to know the ferret's moods, preferred snacks, and any particular behaviors. One scribe notes, "Avoid onions near the white one. She finds the smell offensive." Same, honestly. Now, for your scholarly tension, did mobile ferret units represent true respect for the animal's role, or were they just fashionable accessories of the elite? Some argue that only a few families took ferrets this seriously. Others point to widespread practices of small beast portage as proof that working animals were integrated into elite life far more than once believed. As usual, the answer likely lies somewhere between practical need and noble flair. After several rounds of successful flushing, the ferrets retire to their cart with full bellies and smug little blinks. The nobles move on to pheasant. You stay behind to fold up the nets, offer some dried fig bits, and whisper a quiet thank you. They don't reply. But Sir Whiskers gives you a slow blink that says, "I carried this hunt, and we both know it." By the time you return to the manor, the trio is snoring in a perfect circle. The cart creaks just slightly, like it's proud of itself too. And now, your laugh lines for the evening. Why did the noble ride with 3 ferrets? Because one carriage wasn't dramatic enough. What's a ferret's favorite part of the hunt? The part where everyone else does the running. And how do you pamper a hunting ferret a-wheeled bed, a velvet pouch, and a cheese stipend? Sleep now, traveler. Your team is tucked in. Your wheels are still turning, and the forest remembers their tiny triumphs. Chasing shadows at night. It's just past twilight in the meadowlands, and the sky has turned that deep inky blue that makes shadows look longer, closer, and slightly suspicious. You're holding a lantern that's doing its best, but honestly, it's not helping. And trailing beside you, nose twitching and tail flicking with quiet intensity, is your night shift companion, a ferret named Moonpie. Yes, really, Moonpie. She was named during a thunderstorm and a sugar shortage, and she's lived up to both with wild energy and questionable decisions. Tonight's task night hunting. The rabbits have gotten clever, the weasels are being lazy, and someone, probably a bard, claimed they saw a glowing hare stealing herbs from the abbey garden. So now, obviously, it's time to chase glowing legends through the underbrush. With a ferret, let's ground this tale with your history tidbit. While most medieval hunting occurred in daylight, there are records, especially among poachers, forest wardens, and desperate villagers, of nighttime hunts using trained ferrets and low fires or lanterns. The quiet, discreet nature of the ferret made it ideal for such tasks. No barking, no crashing, just stealth paws and a very determined wiggle. You light your lantern with a flint that immediately burns your finger. Moonpie watches you with the judgment of a creature who never fails a tunnel entry. Then you head into the woods. The night is filled with soft noises, owl hoots, branch creaks, the occasional sigh of a tree that's probably fine. You find the first warren beside an old stone wall. You crouch. You set down your lantern wrapped in oiled parchment for a softer glow and release the star of the show. Moon pie vanishes into the dark like a gossip leaving a room. You listen, and soon enough there's movement, a rustle, then thump. A rabbit bolts out of the far end of the warren straight into your net. Success. But tonight, something's different. Maybe it's the chill, or the wind, or the fact that your socks are wet and your morale is fragile. Or maybe it's the odd glowing mushrooms near the second burrow, which Moon Pie investigates with the suspicious intensity of someone trying to solve a culinary mystery in the dark. Here's your quirky moment. Medieval people often associated strange night behavior in animals with the supernatural. A ferret that refused to enter a burrow under a full moon, obviously cursed. One that spun in a circle 3 times before sneezing, a portent of upcoming weather, or weddings, or wheat prices. Superstitions were flexible. Moon Pie, however, is simply distracted. She's discovered her own reflection in the lantern glass, and she's not having it. For 10 whole minutes, she launches into a silent showdown, with her reflection sniffing, pawing, flopping dramatically. You, the responsible adult in this situation, try to intervene. She disappears under your cloak. The lantern tips. The rabbit escapes. You sigh. She reemerges, victorious in her mind. Now here's your scholarly spat of the evening. Did medieval people ever use light-based training or cues for hunting ferrets at night? Some argue yes, citing descriptions of reflective tags, tiny bells, or lantern signals. Others dismiss it as later embellishment. Either way, the idea of a midnight hunt with a flickering light and a silent beast feels entirely plausible and deeply cinematic. By the third burrow, Moon Pie has regained her focus. She slips into the hole, with purpose emerges with a dusty nose and shakes like a soggy towel. Another rabbit bolts, another catch. You reward her with dried apple. She disapproves. You offer cheese. She reconsiders. Respect is restored. As the stars come out and the mist rolls over the low hills, you call it a night. The rabbits have been chased. The glowing hair was just someone's lost cat. Moon Pie is asleep in your pouch, snoring faintly, and possibly dreaming of her own reflection's defeat. And now a few sleepy chuckles to tuck you in. Why don't ferrets like mirrors? Too much competition for most dramatic pose. What's a nighttime ferret's motto? Glow, low chase, slow. And why did the glowing hair vanish? Because it heard Moon Pie was on the job. Rest well, friend. The forest sleeps. The shadows are calm. And your ferret has declared the night a success. Tavern tales and exaggerations. The fires crackling in the hearth of a half-leaning tavern near the edge of the forest, and the smell of spiced ale, wet boots, and slightly burnt onions lingers in the air like a gossip that won't leave. It's been a long day. Your cloak's damp, your knees ache, and your ferret is curled up in your lap, gently drooling on your belt. Her name is Pickle. She once chased 4 rabbits out of a Warren single-pawed stole a sausage from the sheriff's pantry and allegedly bit a tax collector. But tonight, she's just a nap lump with whiskers. And still, she's the subject of every story at every table. Because here in the tavern, ferret legends roam freely, inflated, embroidered, and frequently tipsy. A man with only one eyebrow is holding court by the fire. He claims his ferret once saved him from a band of outlaws by crawling into a bandit's trousers. Another boasts that his grandmother's ferret could sniff out lies and once exposed a cheating miller. There's talk of a golden ferret that appears in the woods to those pure of heart or just very lost. Here's your history. Hit taverns were not just for drinking and dice. They were the news centers, comedy clubs, and fantasy leagues of the Middle Ages. Stories got bigger with each pint, and animals, especially clever, expressive ones, like ferrets, became perfect protagonists for local myths and beer-fueled sagas. You once heard a traveler say their cousin's ferret escorted a royal letter through enemy territory. Another claimed their ferret dug a tunnel so straight it could be used as a wine cellar. The best stories, of course, have just enough truth to sound dangerous. Pickle shifts in your lap and lets out a tiny snort. Someone across the table leans in and says in a whisper, laced with barley, "Is that the one from the goose incident?" You nod slowly. You have no idea what the goose incident is, but your nod is convincing. The crowd leans closer. One man removes his hat. That's how it goes. Ferrets weren't just tools. In these stories, they're tricksters, heroes, prophets, and occasionally culinary critics. There's even a well-loved tale of a ferret who refused to eat a nobleman's pie, which led to the discovery of a poison plot. The ferret was named Saint Crispin. The pie was donated to the pigs. Let's pause for our academic amusement. Some historians believe these tales reflect deep respect for the animal's intelligence and independence. Others suggest it was all projection. People wanted to believe the animals they worked with were clever enough to outsmart the things they feared. Either way, it tells us one thing people like talking about ferrets. A lot. Quirky detail. One surviving tavern ledger lists a free tankard for the man with the weasel that danced. We can assume it was a ferret, or a very confused weasel. Either way, someone bought that ferret a drink. You sip something warm, probably cider, possibly soup, and listen as the tales keep rolling. A bard strums a lute with only 3 strings. A child insists they saw a ferret juggle pebbles, and someone swears a traveling monk once claimed his ferret could predict eclipses by how much it itched its nose. Pickle twitches in her sleep. A tiny burp. Perhaps she's dreaming of her own glory days, or just digesting part of your dinner. You head upstairs later to your rented room. 1 straw bed, 1 wobbly table, and a bowl of something with too many turnips. Pickle nestles beside your boots. Outside, the wind howls, but inside the walls hold stories like honey in a jar. And tonight, a few well-earned giggles from the corner table. What do you call a ferret that can predict weather? A whisker drologist. Why do tavern tales always include ferrets? Because dragons are too big to fit in baskets. And how do you spot a true ferret legend? It ends with, "And then it bit the king." Sleep now, adventurer. The tales are tall, the fire is warm, and somewhere your ferret is already part of someone else's next story. The decline of ferret fame. It's late autumn now. The trees are mostly bare. The wind whistles with opinions, and your ferret Eglantine, as she's being called this week, is curled tightly in the crook of your elbow. Her fur puffed up, like she's trying to survive a particularly judgmental breeze. You're walking the edge of a field that used to be dotted with warrens. Used to be, because now there are traps, not clever ferret-driven chases, not nets cast with stealth and hope, just metal teeth, wooden springs, and the quiet finality of a world moving on. This is what change looks like. You've seen it coming. Fewer calls for hunting work. Fewer festivals with ferret races or pie ceremonies. The Manor's steward has replaced your pouch with a clipboard. The cook's pantry is now guarded by something called grain jars with lids. Even the monks have invested in cats. Big ones, lazy ones, but ones that don't need wrangling. Ferrets once fashion statements, royal gifts the punchlines of tavern songs, and the unsung heroes of feast day rescues are slowly being sidelined by iron and indifference. Your historical truth of the evening by the late medieval period and early modern era, ferret use in Europe began to decline, partly due to the introduction of more efficient hunting technologies. Traps poisoned later even firearms, partly because urbanization shrank the natural environments that made their work possible, and partly because people forgot. Not all at once, not everywhere. In some corners, they remained. But their golden age, the age of cart riding, treaty signing, feast-saving fuzzballs, faded. You sit now on a fallen log, eglantine, peeking out from your cloak. The traps make you uneasy. There's no joy in this kind of hunt. No craft. No teamwork. Just clicks in the dark. You remember the stories. The ferret tournaments. The velvet capes. The miniature funerals with cider and rosemary. You remember when people named their ferrets after saints and gave them pocket-sized pensions. Eglantine doesn't know any of that. She just knows the cold, the scent of earth, the feeling of your arm around her as the sky darkens. Quirky detail. Before the page turns in some rural areas, old traditions clung stubbornly into the 17th century. There are accounts of villages still hosting ferret festivals of widows who kept one by the hearth to chase off gloom and weevils, and of children being told bedtime stories where the hero is not a knight, but a clever little tunnel dweller with a fierce heart and a flair for chaos. Now for the scholar's lament. Some historians mourn the loss of the ferret's cultural prominence. They call it the decline of the intimate animal, the beast that worked not from afar, but right beside you, inside your home, inside your sleeves. Others argue it's natural. Time changes tools. Tools change stories. But either way, the silence is noticeable. Back on the path, you pass another hunter. He carries iron traps. You carry a pouch with a biscuit and a warm blanket. He nods. You nod. But you both know your methods come from different centuries. And then without thinking, you kneel beside one of the older burrows and let Eglantine slip in one more time. For the memory. For the rhythm. For the quiet satisfaction of doing things the old way. She doesn't catch anything, but she comes back grinning. And now for the closing chuckles of a fading age. Why don't ferrets like modern traps? They lack flair drama and appropriate snack rewards. What's a ferret's retirement plan? Soft socks and selective memory. And how do you honor a fading tradition? You carry it in your pocket, one warm nap at a time. Sleep well tonight. The world changes, but some burrows always remain. Furry legacy in quiet burrows. The sun is soft today. Not lazy, just thoughtful. You're on a gentle slope overlooking a quiet meadow where the grass sways like it remembers things. Beside you, there's no bustling court, no tournament, no suspiciously intense mouse hunt. Just a burrow, and a ferret named Clement. He's older now, slower, a little squintier, but no less curious. And today, you're not here to work. No chasing, no nets. Just the two of you, sitting in the soft hush of a late afternoon, where history exhales and stretches its paws. Clement noses into the grass, flicks his tail, and flops dramatically into a patch of dandelions, like he's trying to become one with the land. You laugh, quietly, It feels right. Because today's not about catching anything, it's about remembering. Let's walk through the last fact in this very fuzzy journey, though their peak fame faded ferrets never truly vanished from European culture. Their legacy lingered in country sayings, herbal charms, and local superstitions. In parts of the British Isles, children were told that a ferret seen before breakfast meant a lucky day. In others, it meant someone had let the pantry door open. Either way, the creature remained a symbol of cleverness, of mischief, of usefulness, wrapped in cuteness. Some modern ferret lovers like to say half-jokingly that their pets are descended from noble lines, ferrets that once helped kings or ran alongside knights. And while the genetics may be murky, the spirit's probably accurate. Ferrets today still carry that odd, enchanting balance of practicality and personality. Just ask anyone who's had to retrieve one from behind a sofa. Quirky footnote. For the road in a village tucked near the old Roman roads, there's a yearly festival where locals gather to celebrate the hunt that wasn't. It involves mock burrows, cheese-based prizes, and the ceremonial crowning of the Queen of the Tunnels, who more often than not is a particularly patient ferret in a flower crown. Academics still argue whether the entire tradition started as satire, superstition, or just boredom on a rainy Tuesday in the 1400s. But the point is, it's still happening. And that in its own way is history too. You lean back on your elbows. Clement has fallen asleep in your boot. A butterfly lands on your cloak like punctuation. The meadow hums with bees, and the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. You think of the stories, the velvet capes, the mobile carts, the treaties signed with paw prints and cheese. You think of Matilda's tiny funeral, of Moon Pie's lantern duel with her own reflection, of the bakery rescued the feast, saved the abbey, defended not with swords or sermons, but with a creature that fit in your pocket and didn't care about titles. That's the real heart of it, isn't it? Not the glory, not the myths, but the moments of quiet partnership. The way a creature small and determined could make a difference, could keep food on the table, could carry stories from burrow to bard, and as the light shifts golden, your eyes grow heavy. Clement stirs. You both drift. And here, gently, are the final 3 chuckles of the journey. Why do ferrets make great historians? Because they never forget where they buried the facts. What's a ferret's retirement hobby? Gardening. Mostly digging. Still no vegetables. And how do you thank a ferret for their service? With warmth and nap, and not asking for change back from the cheese. Sleep deeply tonight. The tunnels are quiet. The tales are told. The legacy curls softly into its burrow, waiting to be remembered again. So here we are, friend. The fire's burned low. The last rabbit has bolted. The last ferret is curled up tight, dreaming of tunnels that go on forever and cheese that never crumbles. You've wandered with nobles, and monks crouched in burrows, and banquet halls followed tiny footprints through forests, fields, and feasts. And through it all, through velvet capes, tax scandals, and softly sung tavern tales, you were never truly alone. There was always a whisper of movement beside you, a flick of fur, a snout nosing at the hem of history. Funny, isn't it, that the quietest stories are sometimes the ones that stay with us longest. Not about kings or wars or who built what cathedral, but about the little creatures who helped in quiet ways beneath notice beyond praise. And maybe that's what makes them perfect companions. They don't ask to be remembered. They just chase what needs chasing, nap when it's time, and remind us that not all heroes wear armor. Some wear fur. Some wear ribboned collars. Some sleep in pockets and dream of glory. You've made it through the night, through every laugh, every tunnel, every stolen turnip. So now, as the stars fade and the sky turns the color of soft parchment, let go of the day. Let the world quiet down around you. The ferrets will keep watch always, alert always, slightly chaotic, always loyal, in their own peculiar way. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.